Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today, we've got two new cards to ring in the new year. It's a new Produce SSR for Juri and a Support SSR for Madoka as part of Twilight's collection. Just remember that these cards are technically limited. They only come around during Twilight's collection banners at a much lower rate once this one is over. So if you want to spark Juri or Madoka, now is your only chance to really do so. Starting things off, we have Juri, which actually starts our second rotation of Twilight's collection. Juri is a pure visual unit with the usual mixture of single target and AoE appeals, who buffs all attributes while also raising up your attention. Her initial appeal has a singular duet by default, while her 1-star appeal has an early double duet if you run the full Hokura lineup. Her 4-star appeal is a massive 6.5 AoE that raises her visual stats and can link into some additional damage. There's a decent amount of things going on here overall. Juri, all in all, is a very solid and important piece to visual Hokura. Her memory appeal feels almost entirely designed around the latest game mode, which incentivizes making all types units, and is especially good at making centers for cheap. Her passives are very much built around building purely Hokura, meaning she can't fully take advantage of the new mode, but there are some workarounds. She's a strong card for a real good team. Her roles are Center, Attack All, Buffer, Duet, and Attention Up, and I moderately to highly recommend pulling for this Juri. Juri's initial appeal is a visual 4.0 that raises your attention by 50% for 4 turns and duets randomly with a member of Hokura. Her plus appeal, which requires all of Hokura on your team and for it to be turned 2 or earlier, grants a Vocal Dance visual 50% buff for 5 turns. Her 1-star appeal is a visual 5.5 that ignores the judge's interest, grants a Vocal Dance visual 80% buff for 4 turns, and 100% attention up for 4 turns. The plus appeal, which requires all of Hokura on your team and for it to be turned 3 or earlier, is a double duet with Hokura randomly. Her 4-star appeal is a visual 1.3 to 6.5 to all judges that scales based on how many characters are in your skill history. The more, the better. This also grants a visual 100% buff for 3 turns and links into a visual 1.5. As for the rest of what she does, at 0 stars she has a visual plus 50 and plus 100 uncap. Her 1-star passive is a visual 50% up and memory gauge 15% up if it's exactly turn 1, and it has a 30% chance to activate once. This comes with a visual plus 150 uncap. At 2 stars, she gets a visual 120% up alongside Vocal and Dance 40% up if you are running the full Hokura lineup. This has a 30% chance to activate twice, and this comes with an all stats plus 100 uncap. At 3 stars, she has a Rainbow passive, which we'll talk about in a minute, alongside a visual mental plus 50 uncap. And at 4 stars, a second Rainbow passive with a Vocal Dance visual plus 100 uncap. Said Rainbow passives, first being her 3-star Rainbow passive, is a visual 200% up and Vocal and Dance 100% up if you have 2 or more active Attention Up buffs. This has a 30% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Her 4-star Rainbow passive is a visual 250% up and Vocal Dance 100% up that requires the full Hokura lineup. This has a 20% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Her memory appeal when maxed out is a Vocal Dance visual 2.5 that links into a visual 4.0. Juri has a couple interesting traits, one of which being 2 Rainbow passives. It's very much worth mentioning that Juri is the first unit to have built-in SP cost reduction to almost all of her skills. Nearly everything on her skill tree costs 10 less SP, so the initial 20 is now a 10, the 30s are now 20s, so on and so forth. That said, she still does have some 50s, but they're at the very end as opposed to being most of the latter half. This means it'll be much easier to unlock all of her abilities in most other game modes, especially on the modes where you feel a bit more starved for SP, which I think overall is going to be super good and maybe is something to keep an eye on for future cards. Whether this is something just tied to a New Year's card or is something for Twilight's going forward, we're just going to have to see. Speaking of, her Twilight's passive is the same as the last, a memory gauge gain of plus 10% to all members. I suspect we won't see this too much longer, as we are probably due for a new variation very soon, but I really do appreciate a lot of the ideas going on with this Juri. Now, Twilight's collection, like every other time, has not gotten any less expensive, so you may only have Juri at 0 or 1 stars. Now, I say Juri as a center is pretty darn strong, especially if you are able to pair up a charge appeal with her. That said, the more you're able to upgrade her, the more she's able to do for the team rather than just be a center. At 1 star, she gets the ability to operate as a duet setup unit, which can help out many of the other members of your team and possibly get you to a much faster memory appeal. The rest of it is also pretty alright. At 3 stars, it also gives her the first rainbow passive, which means that you're still getting a pretty good benefit for not completing the card, and because it's only 2 active attention up buffs as the condition, a lot of teams can theoretically just run this that isn't just Hokura. It's once you get to the maxed out version of her where it very much is built around Hokura. So, there's not really a bad place to end at any point depending on the number of Juri that you get. For the support recommendations, the MVP is, of course, Twikolei Kaho. Visual Hokura always have a trick or two up their sleeve when it comes to synergy, and this case is no different. Kaho continues to be the MVP well after a year since release, while older cards like Cool and Warm Natsuha have seen a massive resurgence of use since the release of the newest game mode, Say Halo. This is also the same reason why I have this Kiriko here, even if she's not the most synergistic card in the world. The name of building in the new mode is Tri-Stat, and Kiriko alongside Natsuha offer plenty of multi-stat uncaps that will make building your character way easier. Being able to save up those side points in order to spend on SP instead, which SP is very plentiful in the new mode, let me tell you, it means that getting your uncaps early is actually super ideal, and it will make it way easier for you to build up strong characters and get some of the strongest effects possible. Now, Mamimi is also included here if you opt to do the more normal strategy of high health builds rather than the more risky low health builds. So if you are aiming for a higher mental stat and have this Mamimi at least at 2 stars, then this is a very good card to consider for the team as well. She's not super mandatory, but it does depend on the type of gameplay that you want to have. For the synergy suggestions, we first have Paracollet Rinzai. The name of the game nowadays is Charge Appeals, and Rinzai is the exact type of attribute Juri would want to utilize on her team. She can double stack attention up and applies duets, making her stupidly synergistic with Juri. Twikolei Kaho packs a good amount of everything for Juri. Her passives are all rainbow coded, which assists her memory appeal on that route. She bolsters interest on judges once her plus appeal is set up, which allows for some really hefty damage for basically anybody on your team, but especially Juri at 4 stars or Juri as a center. And finally, we have Choco 10. What's that, you say? A Hokura idol who needs 2 attention up in order to access part of their kit? And this is a card that does that with 1 appeal? Say it ain't so! These Choco stocks keep on going up. Now that said, if you do have Paracollet Rinzai maxed out, she does also have the ability to double stack attention up, as mentioned earlier. So if you have that Rinzai maxed out, this Choco is a little less necessary, but is still a card that theoretically works out pretty well with the team. She is not mandatory, as per usual, but she does benefit you if you do not have Rinzai's access to double attention up. Now for the grades. Juri as a center earns an S to a double S. This is very interesting. If you had told me that Rainbow Memory Appeals would become super good after 1 update, I probably wouldn't believe you. But here we are. The introduction of the new mode makes it incredibly possible to build around an absurd center in all stats, and Juri can absolutely abuse this fact up front with the damage being all type on the initial appeal. Pairing this with a charge appeal is pretty devious, especially if you have Rinzai's charge appeal maxed out in particular. That is a lot of damage to be throwing around to all judges with ludicrously high stats and some crazy buffs. This card is certainly going to be hitting really hard. As a unit, I'd say she's about an S. Juri is practically the perfect card for visual Hokura now that the dust has settled. Her AoE pairs up nicely with the intended game plan, while her passive allows for a good handful of synergy with previous Hokura cards to really get the ball rolling. If anything, her biggest weakness is that her appeals are fairly tame until she's maxed out, relying on more of the fundamentals rather than going all out from the start. I would also say that her initial passive, being a memory gauge gain that only can activate on turn 1, is a little frustrating, as in a lot of cases this really only comes up if you have a charge appeal, and missing it can be a little annoying, but it's not the worst thing in the world. That said, I wouldn't say that it's like the craziest passive, and I wouldn't necessarily think that everybody grabs it, but it is something to at least consider if memory gauge gain rate is not something you're particularly strong at. I wish that passive would maybe had like a turn 2 limitation instead of just turn 1. So next then, we have Madoka, who takes a very different approach to supports in the traditional sense. She's purely dance, but focuses a lot of her efforts on being built for the newest game mode. Her final passive does not work with Nocchill at all. Full stop. While her 2-star passive condition is entirely locked around getting a very specific buff in Say Halo. Said buff requires you to have 2000 in the dance stat or more. So, unless you manage to reach 2000 dance in that mode, then that passive doesn't do anything for you either. It's hard to say if she's an ideal support to pull for, as it would depend on if you want to commit to a new build entirely, as her synergy with Dance Nocchill is practically non-existent. So if you are a dedicated Dance Nocchill support, or Dance Nocchill producer rather, this card doesn't actually do anything for you, outside of the masteries, so I would say pull carefully. Her support skills include Idol's Bond and Stamina support, and she has technically 6 unique masteries. Unit Mastery SP reaching plus 12 at level 65, Dance Stay Mastery reaching plus 5 at level 80, Dance Best Advice Mastery, which increases the likelihood of her offering up Dance Advice in, say, Halo. This reaches plus 8 at level 80. Dance Mastery Dance Limit Up reaching plus 5 at level 80, Dance Mastery Stamina reaching plus 6 at level 80, and Room Mastery reaching plus 5 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Dance 3.0, becoming a 3.1 with a 5% dance buff for 3 turns at level 60, and a 3.5 with a 25% dance buff for 3 turns at level 80. Her TFD idea is Dance, her insight token for Grad is Vocal, and her proficiencies and landing point are in Vocal and Mental. Madoka's initial passive is Dance 100% up that requires it to be turn 3 or earlier. It has a 20% chance to activate once, and it comes with a Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 1-star appeal is a Dance 3.5 that grants 50% attention up for 3 turns and 1 mulligan, alongside a Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 135% up if you have the Pro Dancer Produce buff from, say, Halo. This is the one mentioned earlier, where it only activates if you have 2000 or more Dance as your stat. This has a 20% chance to activate twice, and comes with, again, a Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 3-star appeal is a Dance 3.5 that grants 50% attention up for 5 turns, a duet with Madoka, and 1 mulligan. And also has a change appeal effect if Madoka's on your team, which is a Dance plus 25% up for 3 turns if the appeal is discarded. This comes with a Dance Mental plus 100 uncap. Her Rainbow passive at 4 stars is a Dance 200% up if there are 3 or more different units on your team, which has a 20% chance to activate once and is limited to once per turn. This then also comes with a Dance Mental plus 100 uncap, rounding out to plus 200 Mental plus 350 Dance. Madoka gets a B plus to an S minus. I really don't have a good read on this particular Madoka. In concept, she'll be very strong for a handful of teams that can take full advantage of what, say, Halo has to offer. On the other hand, players that pull specifically to beef up Dance Nocchill will find this card to be lacking in a lot of ways compared to many of her other cards. The very specific push on both her 2-star and 4-star passives to specifically build in the new mode feels a bit jarring, along with the mastery that legitimately only works in Halo as well. I'm sure she'll find a home to work in, but it's not her normal home for sure. She's overall very solid, but it's not a card for everyone. If you want to experiment with this card, feel free. Let me know how you feel about the card in the comments, if you have been using her for Raid Fest specifically. So, that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching, and Happy New Year! Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, and I'm still in the process of putting together the Say Halo guide, but hopefully that will be done before the month is over. I want to have a much faster turnaround on that compared to some of the other modes, but the strategy for that mode has been changing pretty quickly over the last couple weeks, and now I think we have finally settled on what the best build is. Just trying to work out a couple specific details on that. So, till next video, I've been Cho. Thank you so much as always for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.